What's up, Jantans and Jantanites? My name is Jason Desmond. Welcome to the Jantan Collective. Don't forget, subscribe and check out all the other videos. We talk about a lot of stuff here. There might be a lot of other videos that might interest you, a lot of different topics. So we'd love to hear from you as well. Now, I have depression. I am depressed. Lines like that get thrown about constantly by people who don't suffer from depression, yet the people who do suffer from depression never say stuff like that. What's up with that? To have a discussion about this and to help us analyze, discuss, and also to explain more is clinical psychologist and director at the Mind Psychological Services and Training, Dr. Joel Loh. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
First things first, I kind of know, but you gotta explain it to me. What's the difference between a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist? Basically, psychiatrists get to give out drugs, is it?
Yes, that's the perk of the job, I suppose.
Right.
So I'll throw in counselors as well, because usually that's the tree that gets really confused, right?
Okay.
So psychiatrists are typically medical doctors who specialize or do their master's or postgraduate studies in psychiatry.
Right.
So in the West, so like America, Australia, UK, and all that kind of things, it's not uncommon for psychiatrists to be able to do therapy as well, right? But in Malaysia, not so much, right? So the majority of the psychiatrists in Malaysia would be dealing with more medication.
Okay.
There are a few here and there that do therapy, but very rare. So it's an exception rather than a rule. Now, clinical psychologists and counselors, on the other hand, we do more talk therapy, counseling kind of work, right? So we engage with our clients. We don't do medication. Now, the difference between a clinical psychologist and a counselor is the kind of clients that we see. Counselors will see more day-to-day kind of situations like so stress at work, communication issues, whilst a clinical psychologist can do all of that, but we also work with the more clinical populations.
Okay.
So your schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, like you're talking about, anxiety, OCD, and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay, so in the case of depression, if someone were to come and see you and say, I've got depression, or I think I might have depression, you're basically going to have a conversation with them, try to find out whether it really is that, and whether you can talk them out of it?
Yeah, so I think that's actually a really good point that you raised just now, right? Whether they do have depression or not. So I think oftentimes depression is so commonly spoken about that people will confuse just being sad. Like if my goldfish drowned, for example, and I'm upset about it. That's normal sadness. Everyone will react normally to a loss, right? That makes sense, right? But because of the way media talks about it, the way it's portrayed in TV shows and movies and things like that, all of them think that sadness equals depression, right? So I definitely need medication. I need to see psychiatrists and things like that. But that's not always the case, right? If you're going through bereavement or grief or you're sad just because something bad happened, like Chelsea losing 2-1 to Arsenal, for example, then that's the sadness, right? It's okay. It's no issues there, right?
Right.
But if let's say it gets prolonged, right, and that's what a clinical psychologist would do, understand the scope of things, what's going on, what's happening, the history of the problem. So from there, we're able to diagnose or start to the diagnosis process. And then as a clinical psychologist, what I do is once we have those everything established already, right? We try and find out what can we do about it and all that kind of good stuff.
Have you ever been able to talk someone out of depression, or they kind of fix themselves?
So I think the thing about therapy that we are always very careful is that we don't say we're going to cure you of X, Y, Z.
Right.
We can't say, we're not going to say we're going to cure you for depression or anxiety or panic and things like that. And the reason why we don't say that is because oftentimes people with depression, if you have had it before, you're twice as likely as someone who's never had it to get it again. So that means if you had it, the chance of you having it again is pretty high. So as a therapist, my job isn't to cure you of it. My job is to help you learn to manage it, right?
Right.
Because fundamentally, we have to remember that depression is basically excessive sadness. So if you look at those diagnostic criteria for depression, right, you have to be sad or hopeless or feeling helpless for more than 2 weeks. So if someone's depressed and they come and see me, my job isn't to cure them of it, but to help them understand why it's happening, give them alternative ways to cope with that situation, and then you learn how to manage your depression. So you're still going to feel sad. It's not going to prevent you from being sad, right? But if you do get sad, you're not going to get sad for a year or 6 months, whatever it is. It's going to last for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. And then off you go. You're back to normal again. Like that.
So what does it feel like to be depressed compared to being sad? You said overly sad means depression.
Sadness, So time is one factor. That's one of the big diagnosis criteria that we use. So it's got to be persistent for at least 2 weeks. And when we diagnose someone with depression, we need to meet 2 criteria. One is the sadness. The other one is the feeling of hopelessness. It means there's no hope. There's no way I can get out of this situation. I'm stuck and this is me perpetually. That's the kind of idea or mentality that someone with major depressive disorders. Other criteria that we look out for are things like sleeping difficulties. So I sleep too much or not enough. Weight gain or weight loss, like we're talking about 5 to 10 kilos or in a very short span of time, for example. lethargy, so lack of energy. Anhedonia means you don't have interest in other things, for example. One other thing that we can do is the more severe ones are it's called catatonic depression, where you just become completely paralyzed. You're just lying down there and you're basically a statue.
Right.
You're still alive, you're still functional, your brain's still going on, but you just cannot move.
Okay.
And another extreme is the psychotic depression. It becomes so bad that you start seeing things, hearing things, hallucinating. So those are the really more rare forms of depression. But the more common one that you see every now and then is the sadness that goes on perpetually. It doesn't go away.
But alcoholism, does it factor in as well?
So it's a coping mechanism for some people, or at least they believe it's a coping mechanism, which makes sense because when you drink, your inhibitions drop. Right? It means you are more free with your words, you are more brave, you can go and chat someone up, for example, and that's all fine, right? But in the long run, it's bad because when you lose your inhibitions or your inhibitions reduce, that means the thoughts that you have also come up full speed. And that's why you sometimes have happy drunks and you have like sad drunks as well. Right? Those drunks will just sit in the corner and cry all day. No, man.
Right.
And that's what's happening. They lose the ability to rein in their thoughts, right? And it just flows, right? So it's good and bad.
Let's say I'm a man and my wife passes away at the prime of her life.
Yep.
I'd be depressed for a while though, but I'm not in depression. I'm just really mourning the loss of my wife. Right. That's technically not depression though, right?
So that one we classify under grief, right? So that's a different thing. When you lose something or you lose someone, that's under the grief umbrella, right? So grief, you've got the different stages and all that kind of things. And depression is one of them, where you are processing the loss, the fact that the loved one isn't there anymore, for example.
Right.
So it's not the same. But since we're talking about triggers, I think it's also really weird sometimes. Like people always ask, like, why does depression happen? And honestly speaking, after so many years and all that research that's been done, right, we have no idea.
Oh, there's no one proper trigger.
Yeah, because everyone gets depressed for different reasons, right? Like give a really classic example. You get a family of, let's say, 3 kids, right, from and the parents are abusive, for example. That hits them, right? What you'll find is that not all 3 of them will become depressed when they grow up. One of them becomes super resilient. It's like, yeah, you know what, everything bounces off my back. I'm super positive. Everything's okay. One might become depressed. One might become a bullier to themselves, right? And it's the same family, same parameters and everything like that. But because they're different people, right? How we perceive situations or things really influences whether we become depressed or not. So one thing that makes you depressed, for example, might not make someone else depressed.
Right.
And that's why it makes it so difficult to pinpoint the one sole reason for depression. We have themes, right? So like, for example, biologically, we know that some people with depression have a biological component, means there's some disruptions to your neurotransmitters and those fancy kind of chemicals in your brains, right? There's a cognitive component. So there's some people who have naturally think in a more negative way, for example, or they have more negative beliefs, so they're more likely to be depressed. And the third one is behaviorally, like people who are naturally just more introverted, for example, they don't really interact with other people.
Right.
So those give you a higher chance of having depression, higher chance. But even then also, even when you take all 3 boxes, you might not be depressed.
Right.
You need to have a trigger or something unique that happens that pushes you over there, so to speak, right? And then
but statistically, I'm sure that because of people have been doing so many studies on this, or maybe not enough studies, and I hate boxes where you're trying to tick this, tick that, and everything because there are many shades of gray and everything. But I'm pretty sure that there are certain numbers that sway to a certain thing. Maybe you're the middle child of abusive parents and whatever. Are there such boxes where it's kind of swayed that way that if you were born in this particular situation that you might get it?
So generally speaking, so things like low SES, coming from impoverished backgrounds, from very volatile backgrounds like war-torn countries and all that, it does predispose you a little bit. But again, it's not enough to say that's one of the risk factors, because you also have people who have millions of dollars in a bank account and they come up depressed as well, right?
That is true.
Yeah, so it's really hard to pinpoint in that sense, right?
I'm trying very hard not to be a Gen Xer and say things like, oh, in my time and stuff, but it's generally true. Are kids of the modern age less able to handle stress in these modern times? Because the rates of suicide among the youth
really high.
Are high.
Yep.
Is it a problem with society where we have bred a group of people, right, who are powder puffs, cannot handle the stresses of life? Because there's one article that actually said, oh, the parents are treating them too harsh. Are you freaking kidding me? We had it way harsher. So what do you think? Are kids or are people in general in these times not able to handle stress as much as the people from the past? Or maybe it was not reported.
Yeah. It's a really good question to ask, but I think there's really, really complex answers to it, right? Because if you think about it, right, are millennials more susceptible to depression? I don't think so. I don't think that a 20-something-year-old is going to be more likely to be depressed than a 50-year-old. I think it's more likely that a 20-year-old has more access to good knowledge about mental health, right? They understand what depression is, they talk about it, they have access and all that kind of things. And they're also more likely to talk about their feelings, right?
Right.
Because you're not going to ask a 60-year-old uncle, are you depressed? They say, no, I'm just tired, I just need a beer or whatever it is, and off I go, right? But 20-year-old is more likely to say something like that, right? So that's one possibility, right? Another one also is that, I think because we, as a generation, or the younger generations, they are exposed to so much more content, so much more social media, and they're also very forward-facing. So like our parents, for example, our grandparents, they were always consumers, right? So the only people that you see on TV or on the screen is movie stars and things like that. Right now, any of us can be a star. Just download TikTok and off you go.
Although you will need a FINAS license, but we'll get to that later on. Okay, but yeah.
And I think because there's so much possibility for us to be on screen, I think that also opens up the possibility for us to be attacked, criticized, judged, and all that kind of things. Another possibility is this, right? So you know how our grandparents went through World War, right? Japanese occupation and all the other things. So they raised a generation of people, so our parents who were super hardworking and say, I'm going to strive hard, I'm going to earn money, I'm going to make sure we don't suffer.
Yeah.
My parents did, right? So because they go through so much hardship, our parents go through so much hardship, right? Naturally, they don't want the kids to suffer as well. So the need for the kids to be on their own, like, how our parents would say things like, at the age of 5, I was working for my dad's plantation or whatever it is. So they don't want their kids to suffer. So they said, you want a phone? Here's a phone for you. You want to go and study? Yeah, go and study. Don't go work. Don't suffer like what we did. Our parents have engineered it in such a way that we never face any hardship at all, right? How many kids in university, for example, go to have a part-time job to supplement their finances and all that?
Yeah.
Maybe a third. Compare that with like 30, 40 years ago, it's probably like 3/4.
Yeah, almost everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. So, and I think your question is a simple one. It's a really good one, but it's so complex because there's so many possible answers to it, right?
So you're saying the reason why I personally think, or many people think, people back then didn't suffer from depression was that people didn't, number one, know it was depression. Number two, they didn't have probably time
Correct.
to be depressed because they needed to get shit done.
Right.
Whereas the generation now, there's a lot of information, they know about things like that, and then they're more in touch with their feelings.
Yep. And they have the freedom to actually experience the entire gamut of the emotions that they're going through. Because if not, then if I got to go to work next day, if I got to feed my family, I got no time to be depressed, right?
Correct.
I got to get up and do my job. But now, because we have more flexibility, we can work from home, we can, work online or whatever. And it gives us a lot more options to experience things that maybe our parents never got to, or grandparents never had a chance to.
Why are kids going through this?
Kids nowadays are not allowed to fail, right? You think about Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and all that. You go online, you scroll through the pages and the posts and all that. How often do you see a post of someone saying, hey, I failed my exams. I got no A's for SPM. All you see is I got straight A's, I've got like a scholarship to Harvard or whatever it is, right? And I think because we have so much access to all these fantastic success stories, and we compare to our lives, which is normal, sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, we feel like complete failures. And that just amplifies everything bad about us, which is actually not. If you think about it, this is normal lives, right? It's come to a point where if I fail once, that's my reality. You and I, we've failed multiple times. My driving test, I think went in for 2-3 times.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. SPM, I was not a straight A student. Right? I still don't know how I made it.
You?
PhD.
Really? Okay.
Thanks.
Right. Sorry. You seem like one of those kids that I would beat up in the bathroom back when I was in school. Because I was an asshole in school. Right. So that's just how it is. But
yeah. So I think because we fail and we learn from that, right?
Yeah.
We learn how to cope from that and then bounce back from that. Kids nowadays, if they fail, right, it's everywhere, right? Like you and I fail, who remembers you and I remember? Like,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You fail on Facebook one time, you fail on Instagram one time, that's it, man. You are there forever, right? If your pants tears and then you see your SpongeBob boxes on TV or whatever it is, that's it. It's going to be there forever and ever.
So you're just saying that what happened to us back when we were at school because of the bully culture, that we were bullied at some point, or in my case, I was bullied so much and then I became a bully. Like, that's a whole other discussion for another time. But
call me.
Right? It's just amplified a lot more now because of social media.
Right.
I get that. But when you see, like when we were kids, we watched I watched TV and I watched like a commercial on TV. It looks great, but at the back of my mind, I know it's not 100% how it's
Right.
supposed to be.
Right.
I could filter what was real and what was not. Why can't they do that with social media?
When you watch a TikTok, when you watch a Facebook live, when you watch an Instagram story, those are real people, right? Those are our friends, our neighbors, our
Right.
cousins, and all that. And that strips away that possibility or that filter that we have, that these are just stories that we're watching. When that happens, it's not the same anymore, right? It's not just a story you're watching, right?
Right.
So I think that's why there's so much difference. That's why it's easy for you to filter out way back when.
Yeah.
And now it's not so easy anymore. I mean, we as adults, we can do it.
Yeah.
Sure, lah, but you give that to a 12, 13-year-old, they can't.
Yeah.
That's literally my cousin that grew up, who's older than me.
Or this Johnny down the street. Oh my
Exactly.
God, he's got all this and he's so great and
Exactly,
whatever, right? And he can play skateboard.
Exactly.
I kind of get that. It's kind of like in the news, all you saw were all these startup entrepreneurs doing so well. I got this funding, got that funding. My goodness, it's the bomb, right? And then you're struggling here. You can't even get through one funding round and then you don't get through it. But what you don't see is like 98% of them are fucking failures, right, in their life. And then they have mental issues, but then their marriages are broken, their families are broken up and whatever. But all you see is like, oh, wow, I created this multi-million-dollar company. And
Right.
look at how amazing it is.
Right.
So I see how relative it is to me. I get that. But if you're talking about failure being the catalyst for why people have depression, then why do some celebrities off themselves because of depression?
Yeah, I think so. The failure one, that's just one aspect of it. Obviously, it's not the be all and end all depression. There's many reasons why you can be depressed, right? And the thing about a lot of creative people, especially comedians, right? And this is my own personal pet theory kind of thing. But in Robin Williams' case, it is true, right? He's diagnosed with bipolar depression, right? Bipolar disorder, sorry. So with bipolar disorder, and the reason why this is my pet theory is that a lot of creative people are bipolar is because when they're on the manic phase, right? Manic is on the high. So bipolar is a situation where you oscillate between depression, right? So you're depressed, or when you're manic, right? So manic is when you feel you're super energetic, you're super energized, can do anything, you're super funny, you're life of the party, you can ask anybody out, they all say yes to you, you can buy 5 cars, 3 condos, no problem.
Right.
You can do everything, right? And I think a lot of creative people are bipolar because they thrive on that manic energy, and then when they're on stage, right, they are just like a rocket, right? Like Robin Williams, I think, was a perfect example of that. When he's on stage, he's unstoppable.
Yeah.
Force of nature kind of thing, right? But what you hear from friends and family is that off camera, off stage, he does have a dark side, right? So I think with, if I'm not mistaken, like Robbie Williams was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and that would be one of the reasons why, or explain what happened with him and why he committed suicide, right? So I think it's really hard for us to pinpoint or say for a fact that you guys are so successful. Why are you depressed? Why are you killing yourself?
Yeah.
In that sense, right? It's too simplistic to put in that way, like, in that sense, right? And it's the same reason why, if you look at people who are insanely rich, like tycoons and all that, they used to be depressed. And the typical or the standard saying would be like, what is there to be depressed about, right? You're trying to simplify or trying to make it too easy, like, in that sense, like, because every one of us has our own trigger points, right? And I told this to an intern of mine once, it's not our place to decide what makes this person depressed. For one person, it's not enough food on the table. For another person, it's because I couldn't get the latest Chanel bag, right? It's really not our place. Our place is just to accept that that's what made you depressed. That's what we can deal with and work on.
So it might be relative.
Yeah, it could be anything at all.
When you look at someone like Kanye West or Robin Williams, is that what you look for? It's like, wow, he's the man. Nothing can stop him. He's the greatest thing ever. Is that the thing where you go, I think he might?
Yep. Usually that, or when people like you see them like when they're on the high line, right, and they can do anything, like you can throw anything at them and they just off they go, right. I mean, all of us can be the life of a party. All of us can be very animated and happy and excited. That's all well within all our wheelhouses. But for you to be that turned on perpetually for like 2-3 hours in a stage show, for example, or in a movie, that's hard. So whenever I see someone like that, that's the first question I ask, right. And then the next thing I do is if I'm trying to diagnose them, for example, I watch for patterns. If there are like sudden bursts of this kind of crazy manic creative energy, for example, combined with that super low moods, like, I hate the world hates me, and that kind of thing,
right,
then it kind of confirms a diagnosis that it's likely to be bipolar disorder, like that sense.
So how do we scale it back to some like regular people in a corporate setting?
Yep.
How will you know that someone has depression? How can you pinpoint?
That's actually quite hard. There's something called high functioning depressives, right? So these people, if you do the assessments on them, they meet every single criteria for depression and the scores are off the charts, right? But for all intents and purposes, they're still able to go to work. They're still able to function socially with people. And they're able to get the work done and thrive as well. So usually when I talk to the HR managers of the world, for example, and they ask, well, how do I find out if someone's struggling? The first thing I tell them is how are they doing socially and occupationally. So in probably 75% of the cases, you can detect through that. If someone is usually really very sociable or who's really good at their jobs, suddenly all of that declines, right? They're not socializing, they're not speaking to anyone, they come to work in pajamas, for example, hair uncombed, unkempt. They're not getting the KPIs and goals.
Has that actually happened?
It has happened, oh yes. Especially during this COVID-19 thing.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of people went, it was hard for a lot of people. They really hard for them to cope. Where was I? Yeah, so we would tell HR to look out for those kind of signs, right? That means it's really a stark difference from who they were before, right? Usually in that case, those kind of cases, it's a red flag for us. That means something is going on, right? But for the high functioning depressives, right, it's not there. It's the same like functional alcoholics. I think that's the more common thing we've heard about, right?
Yeah.
People wake up, they have a drink in the morning, but they're still able to power through the day.
Yeah.
Right? It's similar, right? So they are depressed, but they're still able to function. That one is super hard to detect and super dangerous as well.
Yeah.
Because no one will realize that they're going through problems. No one will realize that they're going through a hard time, and no one's going to then lend support to them.
Until it's too late.
Exactly. So that one's really, really difficult. Even you put them in front of psychologists as well, right? It's hard unless we have a really long conversation with them and really start digging deep. Right? It's even for us, it's hard to detect. Sometimes.
Right. So look out for the life of a party sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Especially if it's unnaturally so. Like every single party they go to, every single social event they go to, they are like the center of attention, right?
Right.
Something is probably up.
How do you deal with these people?
Yeah, there's a difference between depression, like major depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder, right? So although the symptoms look alike especially when the bipolar person is having the depression stage, right?
Okay.
It's the same manifestations, like it's still the same thing. But how we treat the two of them is very different. Imagine someone with depression, right? They go see a psychiatrist and they get antidepressant medication. Makes sense. So they take it, they balance out the neurotransmitters, and then they feel better after that. Now, if this person with bipolar disorder isn't diagnosed properly, and it's very common, right? So obviously, when you're on a high, you're not going to go see a therapist because I'm feeling good, right? I only see a therapist when I feel crappy, right? And that's when they're in the depressed stage. So they go see a psychologist or psychiatrist, they get diagnosed with depression, and then they also get antidepressant medication. That's really dangerous because remember how I talked about how with bipolar disorder, you're oscillating between depression and on a high, right?
Yeah.
If you're depressed, you take depression medication as a bipolar patient, your depression jumps up to, like, it ends, it gets treated, right? Your high gets amplified tenfold, right? Because it's like you bring everything up, right? And I think when that happens, right, the fallout from that is spectacular, right? Unfortunately, because it feels so amazingly good when they finally do crash, right? Everything is just amplified, right? The depression is so much more intense. So I think when we talk about depression, we need to separate the two.
Okay. So we need to classify them
separately. Yep. So to answer your original question, how do we treat them, right? For me, the work that I do CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, right? I try and find out what's the underlying reasons. So if regardless of whether you're depressed because you're MDD, major depressive disorder, or depressed because you got bipolar disorder, right? There are reasons why you are like that, right? And for CBT, for example, we say that there's an underlying belief that you have. It's usually either I'm useless or I'm unlovable. That's the core belief that we have. Ultimately, all of us here would have either one of those. So you have that, I have that, right? And that drives all our behaviors, our emotions, our reactions, and whatnot. If your core belief, let's say hypothetically, was I'm useless, and you live your life based on that belief, that's not true. No matter how big a failure you are, you're going to have some successes along the way, whether it be in terms of good friendships or getting up in the morning, brushing my teeth, putting on clothes, and going off to work. That's a success story on its own.
Yeah.
So to have such an all-encompassing belief that I'm a complete failure, it's false. It doesn't make sense. So as a therapist, I try and help you find out what that is and then try and smooth out the edges a little bit and find something a bit more rational. And that balances our life, which is what makes sense.
That's coming from you as a psychologist. Yes. How you would treat someone who's like randomly who actually has that. If I'm working with someone who has depression, how should we properly, we not interact with this person? Do we try to engage them and always get them on when they're on a high and then leave them alone when they're having those episodes?
Well, I think it depends on how much you want to help, right? Because, and this is something that I caution everyone that I see, and they say, hey, I really want to help. I've got a friend or a family member who's going through a hard time and I really want to help them. And I tell them, yes, but do you want to help or do you have to help? I think there's a really big distinction there. Because there are some people with that Superman syndrome where I have to save everyone around.
That's what's slightly narcissistic as well. That's another disorder right there, right?
Another topic for another day, I suppose. Right? But that's important because then it will help us decide how we can help this person, right? So let's say, I want to help this person. I care for this person, is a really good friend, and I want to make sure that he's okay. So in those kind of situations, I would suggest that you just do things with them, right? Go out for coffee, go out for a beer, go and watch a movie, go jungle trekking, go skydiving together. Just do activities with them. That's actually the lowest hanging fruit that you can do for someone with depression. Because it's always a cycle, right? I feel crap. Then after that, I recluse myself. I don't go out. I stay at home. And because I stay at home all the time, I have a lot of time. All my thoughts are idle. I'm thinking about all these horrible things about myself. No one likes me. Everyone ignores me. I feel even crappier, right? And then I stay at home even more. So this is really bad vicious cycle that happens, right? So the easiest thing that you can do is to just get them to do stuff, right? Go out and watch a movie, go and play some football, futsal, whatever it is, right? And you break that chain. It's the easiest thing you can do, right? So the first thing that you can try and see it for a friend. Another thing that you can do is just listen them out, hear them out, sorry. And the reason why I say that is because our minds are fantastic things at creating fantasy scenarios, right? So if I ask you, for example, what do you have for your last birthday? Can you remember? You remember that, right?
Kinda, yeah.
And if I ask you what do you want for your coming birthday, like how would you like to celebrate? You could let me know what you would like. You can imagine.
PS5, sorry. Okay, just throwing it out there. Sponsors? Okay.
Me too.
Yeah.
But because of that ability, right, that allows us to think about aeroplanes and laptops and microphones and all that kind of things, it also creates a situation where we can amplify negative thoughts, right? So from, oh no, my boss sent me an angry email to I'm going to get fired to I'm going to die alone in the gutter. No one's going to care about me.
Just from an email.
Correct. And that's the same fantastic ability that our brain has to create fantastic scenarios, right? From a microphone and airplane, it's not that big a difference from getting a bad email to I'm going to die alone, right?
Right.
The same kind of system in place, right? So if you're able to just speak to this person and let them sound out their thoughts, right? It's like a pressure valve in that sense. You stop their thoughts from growing bigger and bigger and bigger, more compressed until they explode, but they give it on little bite-sized chunks. So they tell you, hey, you know what? I got an angry email. I think I'm going to get fired. Use a friend coming, you don't be crazy. He sends out 10 angry emails a day and gets fired, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes, oh yeah, that's true. So you kind of temper out his thoughts a little bit.
Are we allowed to say stuff like that? Because I always worry about saying the wrong thing. I worry about saying stuff like, I know exactly how you feel. Because I don't know how the fuck you feel, right? Because you're doing something completely different from me. If I say, it will pass, are there things that we shouldn't be saying?
That's actually a really good point. So all those things you said, don't say it.
Right.
Because you're using your own reality and experiences and then trying to implant it into him.
Yeah.
Which is not fair, right? And we talked about perspectives as well. What you find blasé and okay about might drive him nuts.
Yeah.
What he finds okay might drive you crazy in that sense, right? So if you want to have that kind of conversations with these people, right, who are going through a hard time, talk facts, right? That's fine. So like, for example, boss sends out angry email, he gets triggered. We know for a fact boss sends out 10 angry emails every hour.
Right.
So those are facts. So you just tell them that, hey, this is what's actually happening, right? So you don't try and impose your own reactions or experiences onto these people who are depressed, for example. Instead, you tell them, hey, this is actually what's happening. This is the reality. This is the factual situation of it, right? And then they get to decide on their own. Now, is this going to work 100% of the time, even with the behavior activation?
Yeah.
It's not, right? 9 times out of 10 it's going to work. The other time it's not going to work. And that's the reality of the situation. Even with therapy as well. Even though I know my techniques work, it's not going to work all the time. But as a lay person, as a friend, as a co-worker, as a loved one, that's what you can try and do. Go out with them, speak to them. The last thing that I would advise that you do is, if you don't know what to do, if you've heard them, you've gone out with them every single night for a month and you're just completely stuffed, I don't know what else to do anymore.
Yeah.
The next best thing you can do is that, hey, you know what? I found these 5 centers that I heard and I've done my research on them. They come highly recommended. They're really good people. Let's go together.
Right.
That's the next best thing we can do. Because I wouldn't ask you to do any more, because if not, what's going to happen is that you're going to get bogged down as well. You're going to feel bummed out. And then instead of one depressed person, you're going to have 2. Right, it's going to be...
Because I'm going to get affected.
Exactly. And it's very natural. Even as therapists as well, right? We are encouraged to have our own therapists because we sit in a room all day and listen and absorb everyone's negativity. There's no way in heck that you're not going to get affected.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, on that, right, is depression hereditary? Or you just mentioned that if you keep absorbing all this negativity, you will be affected as well, right?
Yep.
So I've got a friend whose mom... and I think other members of the family has depression as well. His solution is I got to work, right?
Right.
I work I'm fine. I get out of, I won't have these feelings of, he always talks about this darkness that's coming and whatnot, and he can't control it. So the only way he can control it, he wants to take control of it, he works.
Yep.
Right? But every time he goes back, then it happens.
Right.
It's environmental, right?
It can be. So like this during this COVID-19 lockdown, right? The amount of people who completely lost it, it's crazy, right? Because like you said, a lot of people use work as a coping mechanism. So the more I'm distracted, the more I'm out there doing stuff, keeping busy, it keeps the demons away.
Right.
So when they're locked down, they're home all the time, they just stare at a computer, it gets cray really quickly for a lot of people like that sense, right? So you're right, it can be environmental. So another good example of this is there was this crazy study was done, right? You take potted plants, right? And you put two potted plants side by side, right? One, you give it affirmations, right? You say positive things to it, right? Another one, you say negative things to it, right? The negative one actually builds faster or grows slower or something.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it sounds like pseudopsychology, but it's been replicated, right? You look at it from a human perspective, right? Kids, and sometimes you have this situation where there are some kids in the family who are favored, some are not, right? I heard this crazy story from a friend once where at the point of birth, the family took this person to what you call it? Tiling nasib.
Fortune teller.
Right. And the fortune teller told them, right, this child of yours is going to bring nothing but bad luck to your family. So from day one, this child was screwed, basically.
Yeah.
And the family gave him this person so much crap. You're a useless child. You're bringing ill fortune to the family. You're going to bring the family down and all that. There is no way on earth this child is going to thrive.
Right, succeed.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So environment does play a big deal. In terms of genetics, it does play a role as well. I think if I'm not mistaken, if your immediate family members have depression or some kind of mental disorder, you're 50% more likely to inherit it yourself. But it's half and half, 50-50 chance.
Right.
If you never had one, then your chances are much less, of course. But the genetics does play a big role as well.
On that though, let's say if I knew a family member had, or someone close, maybe just a friend, has depression, or I think has depression. But I remember you always say you can drag a horse to water, but you can't force a horse to drink.
Yeah.
If this person has never been diagnosed with depression, and then you're saying, hey, I think you have this, let's go get it checked out. Do you say things like that? Because I don't want you to affect me. I'm trying to take care of myself, right?
Yep.
How do you get them to go see someone like you?
That's a really good question. It's impossible to answer because some people, when they hear that, they're going to lash out with you.
Yeah.
Say, what the hell, man?
Oh, you think I'm crazy?
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Some people will say, dude, thanks so much. I finally know what it is. You've helped me sort of kind of figure things out. Let's go find help, right? So it's hard to tell what's going to work for these people, right? But usually what will help best is that you don't label them. Don't say things like, hey, I think you need professional help and you should get whatever. Don't say things like that. Tell them things like, your own perspective. We've been talking about this for 30 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is, right? I don't know about you, even I feel helplessly helpless.
Right.
I'm wondering whether we should speak to someone who, like third person, outside perspective that could be really helpful to help us find a different solution to this problem. So put it in that perspective. So you're not saying, hey, you're the problem, stop bringing me down, but saying, hey, you know what, we've got a shared problem we want to work on together. I really want to help you. Let's go and find someone who can help us.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a really good way to bring them along. Another good one is that if you are family, right? And I tell this to a lot of people as well. Family, it's so hard to get family members in for therapy because there's so much baggage.
No.
It's so hard, right? So if you can ally yourself with a good friend, for example, who also knows sort of kind of what's going on, that might be a better approach sometimes because then there's less.
It's going to be objective.
Correct. A more objective,
Right.
So then get them to involve. Get them, encourage them to go, and then off they go, in that sense.
Do people not go to seek help, professional help, mental help, because of the taboo that if you go see someone about mental health, you're crazy?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Is that it?
We had one situation once in our center, right, where she wanted to have an appointment with us, right? She said, can you please clear out your clinic from 3:30 to 5:30, the sessions between 4 and 5, so that no one can see me going into your center.
Right.
I will take the lift from your basement all the way up to your center, and then I'll just run in and I'll wear a coat and whatever it is. I just don't want anyone to see me. So the answer to your question is yes, right? There's lots of people who don't go because the instant I step foot into a psychiatrist's office, a psychologist's office, or whatever it is, it makes it real.
Yeah.
Right. So the more I deny it, as long as I don't acknowledge it, as long as I don't get treatment for it, it's not real. It means I'm still okay. Right. Once I acknowledge it, once I get treatment for it, then that's it. I'm screwed. Right. Which is such a crying shame. Because something like depression, for example, again, I'm not saying we can treat it, but we can manage it to a point where it's not an issue for so many people.
Yeah.
I've got clients who been depressed for 15, 20 years. They come and see me, they learn how to manage it. And are they going to be sad? Of course they're going to be sad, but they never have to come in again because they know how to cope with it. And you can have such a better quality of life from there on out, right? And that's why I think it's such a shame that people hide away and they don't get help. You've got struggles, I've got struggles. Sometimes I need help, right? You need help right now. I'm trying, but I don't think I'm the right person for it. Let's go find someone who can.
Right.
So when you normalize it like that, then it becomes more easy or more palatable for the person. So it's not like I need to see a shrink because I'm crazy.
Yeah.
I need to see a therapist because I need a hand. I just need to get back up again. That's all.
Is it harder for men to go seek professional help for mental health? As it is, we're like, no. We are the ones that help you. No one helps us, right?
Right.
How do we break that barrier for men?
It's super hard.
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
If I cry, I'm seen as being soft and I can't handle pressure because I've been guilty of this. When I see colleagues sometimes, right, men who cannot handle it, and then next thing you know, they're tearing up and then they're crying because the boss yelled at them, and I'm like, oh, the guy's weak. And after that, I feel bad for saying that because I'm like, I shouldn't feel that way because maybe he's going through some shit that I don't know of. Right? But society is partly to blame for all this, right?
Partly to blame, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's so hard because, and you know what's the crazy statistic? Females are twice as likely to be depressed, right? So it's about 2-to-1 ratio, right? But males are twice as likely to commit suicide.
Women are twice as likely to
Depressed, right?
but we have the higher chance of offing ourselves.
Yeah, because guys are the stereotypical, I'll keep everything in until I can't and explode. For me, what I've done personally is that whenever I've got friends who struggle, I never speak to them in public, right? So I say, hey, you know what, let's go for a drink or over a beer or a coffee, whatever it is, right? And then I ask, hey, dude, what's up? Right. So I'm allowing this person the space to share if they want to, and if they're not, then hey, you know, if you do struggle, let me know.
So you're really what's going on?
Yeah, just hey, what's up, man? So at least from two people talking, then the vulnerability factor is much less, right? So hopefully with that in mind, then they're more able to open up in that sense. The worst thing you can do is like a party of like 6-7 batangs, and then you ask them, hey, dude, what's up? How come you crying today? I saw you.
Yeah.
You sure that.
Yeah.
We want to avoid that kind of situation. Allow them as much privacy and confidentiality as you can, and that's one way. Another one is, I love conversations like this that we're having because these are conversations we need to have more of.
Yeah.
People out there, for every one person who knows about depression and knows that it's okay to get help, I can easily tell you 10 other people who don't. And we're only talking about the urban areas like KL, Penang, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You move out to the more rural areas like Pahang, Kuantan, for example, East Malaysia, I'm pretty sure it's going to be like 10 times worse.
Really?
I'm pretty sure because...
I would think this is an urban issue, wouldn't it be?
No, depression is fine everywhere. Like we've got clients flying from Kuching to get therapy from us because there's no therapists over there. I mean, less therapists over there. It's everywhere kind of thing, right? It's just how we deal with it, what kind of resources we have to cope with it, and that kind of stuff. Conversations like this, just you going out to talk to people, just randomly saying, hey, you know what? I heard this podcast with JD and he's talking about depression among guys. Fantastic, brilliant, go do that, right? And the more people talk about it, people know about it. I honestly think that's the best way to go about it, right? Because there's you can't force someone to go see a therapist, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But if they internally, implicitly want to seek help, that's what we're going to try and achieve here. Like that sense.
And I guess it's easier for older guys because I've had a chat with friends of mine and we're all around the same age and we start talking about balding. Right? And then, hey, it's okay because we're already at a certain age.
Right.
Does it get better with age?
I think when it's something that's physical, I think when it's something that is almost to a point celebrated, like even like with hair, so like, guys get older, they lose hair, it's a sign of aging, you're growing up, being more mature. I think for those kind of things, this is my own hypothesis, like I don't know whether it's substantiated or not. I think that's going to be more okay. But when it comes to emotions, I have a feeling it's inverse. The younger that you are, the more easier it is for you to express yourself. But
Right.
the older we get, we have more on our plate, more on our shoulders.
I'm the cornerstone of the family.
Exactly, I hold the family up and all
Yeah.
those things, right? So if I am weak, right, like in a business setting, for example, one of the reasons why entrepreneurs never claim or say that I'm depressed or whatever is because if you're weak, our investors are gonna put money into your company,
Yeah.
right? So my gut feeling tells me that it's going to be inverse. So the more I have on my shoulders responsibilities, the less likely you are going to come in and say, hey, you know what, I need help, right? Because we don't have the opportunity to. I think that's my impression or my gut instinct.
Right.
But if you think about it, right, if obviously I don't have the money, but if I had, right, I think these are people I'm actually going to invest in because they are the ones who can face their inner demons, their emotions, and say, hey, you know what, I messed up, I screwed up, I'm in a shithole right now. But I can acknowledge it and I want to do something about it. Rather than them hiding behind a veneer of greatness and awesomeness and then the
Right.
The world is crumbling around them, right? I think honestly, someone who can have access to these emotions and express it healthily, that might be a better investment actually if you think about it.
I guess what you're trying to say is we need to make it okay for guys to be vulnerable.
Exactly.
And it starts with other men as well, right? We shouldn't be all, hey, whatever, like, you know, pinch each other's ass and everything, right? Stuff like that. But are we in a better position now, men, in this new millennium, whatever you want to call it, new norm, to be more emotional compared to in the 40s, World War and everything?
Yeah.
Are the men of this generation better at it?
I think yes, because of what resources we have, right? So like 40 years back then, you want to socialize people, it's the bar, it's the pub, it's the coffee shop, right? Now we've got Facebook groups and Telegram and all that kind of things. I think because of the anonymity that social media and internet grants us, I think guys have more access to this kind of information and also support from other guys.
Right.
So I think because of that, then we can be more prepared. So can being the keyword here, like, can is one thing, 1, 2 is another, right? So the opportunities are there for you to gain a support group, for example, or network to people support you and things like that. But whether you want to or not is a different question. That one we cannot control, right? But I think the resources out there are definitely.
I keep wondering about this because as a man, and I'm cornerstone of the family, stuff like this, right? How would it look like to my neighbors or my whatever it is if, let's say my wife has an episode, let's just say whatever it is, or a friend of mine whose wife had an episode and then she doesn't want to leave the room for whatever amount of days and whatnot.
Yep.
People talk, right? Or maybe she's just going through something.
Yep.
And a man goes through that. Let's say he doesn't want to come out of his room and then he's going through something. Let's say he lost his job or whatever it is, and he's just in his room and he's going through an episode, right? That's not viewed as well.
No support.
Right?
Yeah.
So just need to change the world view.
Yeah, easy, right?
Right? The whole world, we need to change that view.
Yeah, and I think you just gotta start small. I think it is something that is probably, I don't know, not even in our lifetimes, like I would think. But we need to start somewhere. And conversations like this, for example, this is one way to start. As long as the information is out there, people can have access to the information. I think that's as good as we can get right now. Right?
Yeah.
So people, even if they don't want to acknowledge it, it's there already. The seeds are planted, right? If I need help, I can go get help. It's okay.
Yeah.
So 20 years from now, when they actually go through a shitstorm, for example, and they hit a brick wall, hey, you know what? I listened to that podcast that day. I spoke to someone that day, and they said, you know what? I can't get help. It's okay.
Right.
You can plant those seeds. I think that's a really good job already for now.
Yeah.
In the future, let's see what happens.
Because I think this COVID thing also brought out, because you can't go online right now and then if you type COVID, it's either vaccine, it's either the numbers of people infected or it's mental health.
Yep.
How many people have been affected by it, right? What are your thoughts on getting medicated for depression? Because you're a psychologist.
Yeah. I think it has its place, definitely. Because like I said earlier on, the causes for depression are multifold. We don't know what causes depression, right? So there are some people with some genetic predispositions where they just don't have enough of a certain kind of neurotransmitters like serotonin, if I'm not mistaken, right? So they just biologically don't have enough of that, and that's your happy hormone, happy neurotransmitter,
Right.
basically, right? So when you're happy, your body creates more of it, and then you feel happier about it. Some people just have a deficiency; it's just not enough, right? So no matter how much therapy you give them, right, it's not going to work. You need that medication to change that cycle so that you have more.
But it's a physical thing.
Exactly. So for me, I think go for it, man. Not an issue. Studies have also shown that the most effective form of treatment is actually medication first, calm the symptoms down. When your emotions are more in check, your mind functions a bit better, then you start therapy, right? So a combined treatment method actually is the fastest, most effective way of treating depression, right? So for me, I'm all for it. But I know that, especially in Malaysia, Asians at least, right, there's this whole idea about taking medicine and it's not good for you.
Yeah.
So people do want to try a bit more therapy first before medication.
Yeah.
But for me, I've got no qualms about it. If it helps, go for it. Whatever helps you, that's my motto. Whatever helps you, go for it, man.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way about it. It's just whatever works for you,
Right.
And try it out and see.
Now, taking control of your life, there are some things you just don't have control over, like COVID-19, lockdown, no jobs. How do you take control of that?
Yeah.
But it affects you,
Yep.
right? You can't get out of this state because you can't get a job.
Right.
You're punching away, getting that CV out there, but no matter how much you do it, there are no jobs.
Yeah. This is a practical thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
TLDR, mental gymnastics, right? And what I mean by that is basically, if your entire worth as a guy is determined by how many zeros you bring back in your paycheck, for example, right? You go through COVID-19, you get fired from your job, you can find a new job. You know, it's very world shattering, right? My entire identity as a person is gone, right?
Right.
So when I say mental gymnastics, what I mean by that is if really there is literally no jobs for you out there right now, then maybe your worth as a person needs to be defined a different way, right? So if you can't find a job, let's say in finance, that's where you are, is there anything else that you could do to bring yourself your income, right? To just put food on the table, or whatever it is, right? And focus on other things that make you who you are, right? So let's say you have a particular skill or talent. Let's say you're really good behind a camera or on the mic, whatever it is, right? Is this now the best opportunity for you to play that up, right? Go get behind a video, shoot some videos, put it on Facebook and see whether you get any traction, for example, right? If you have a talent, you like to bake, for example, right? Go bake, right? And then see whether you can make a living out of that, right? And that's what I mean by mental gymnastics. Sometimes we're just too caught up by what we used to have and we're so afraid of losing it that it just consumes us. Like the instant it goes away, we're like, oh my God, what do I do, right? But if you really think about it, if your entire reality it really is defined by just one parameter, that's just damn scary. It's like literally putting all your eggs in one basket. Right? So when practically it's not available, then what you need to do is to start looking at other things in that sense. You can't control work, or the options or the work offers that you get, definitely. But what else can you do? You can focus on upskilling yourself. You can focus on finding alternative forms of employment, right? Self-employ yourself. Maybe start your passion project, whatever it is. Those are within your control. That's what you need to trying to do in that sense now, right? And that's what I mean by mental gymnastics now.
So if we got together with a lady, woman, who liked us for our car, for our condo, for our job, maybe I was a day trader or whatever the fuck it was, right? If I lost all that, we worried that we might lose the person that we married.
Right.
Because we think that she loved us for all this, right?
Right.
So do we talk to said lady, said wife, said partner in life, oh, that I can't get a job right now because economy is such.
Yep.
Are you okay with it? Are we as men, cornerstone, allowed to do that?
I think a question to answer your question is, can you afford not to? Hypothetically, your wife really is with you because of all these material things that
it's the wrong kind of relationship to be in, right? Yeah.
Exactly, right. She's in love with you, just in love with your bank account. Right?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, is that relationship worth continuing or not?
Right.
Literally, what else can you do to bring in the money when there really is no money available? I mean, you can sell a kidney, I guess, but you need 2 kidneys, right?
Yeah.
2 lungs or whatever you want to call it, right? So I think if it comes down to that, that is definitely a conversation you need to have because I think it's only fair for your partner as well, right? I mean, if she thinks that all is all rosy and hunky-dory and everything is good, and then suddenly, hey, let's have Maggie for 5 days a week, right? And she's not ready for it or she doesn't realize what's going on, that's not being fair to her as well. She
right.
be able to realize that this is the reality of the situation, this is what's happening to us. So can we do it versus I think you should do it? I think it's 2 different questions here.
Right.
Can you afford not to do it? And I think the answer is no.
Because probably what you're going to get is you think I'm with you because of your money, because of this, because of that and everything, right? So we hope that that's where the conversation will go to.
Right.
So short of changing the world, changing how men have been for multiple generations of ribbing each other whenever we're feeling a bit down and hey, you're crying, huh? Short of being able to change that, how can we help men who are suffering from depression? What can we do?
I think on a few levels, right? So if it's a friend or family member, I think the best thing that you can do is just to be present, be available, right? So you don't have to say, hey, you know what, tell me what's going on, but say, even anytime you want to have a beer or want to go have a drink, for example, let's go do something crazy together, go drive up to, I don't know, Penang for Char Kway Teow and come back, for example. Make yourself available for that, so at least then they have an outlet. That's one thing that you can do. The other thing is, like I said earlier on, I found out these 5 places that we can go to together. They come highly recommended. They do really good work. Let's see if we can get some professional help, right? To someone to give us a third of a person's point of view in that sense. And I think the last easy thing that you can do as a friend and family member is just to be with them, right? Sometimes you just sit down there quiet, you're on PlayStation, you guys on FIFA or whatever it is for 2 hours. That could be really helpful as well sometimes, right?
Not for me, I'm horrible at FIFA,
or Call of Duty or whatever. Right? And that could be really helpful as well, right? So on a person-to-person level, on a friendly, familiar level, I think that's what you can do. One level higher on a society level, I think we need to have more conversations about this, right? So if you are afraid to talk about your depression on personal level. Talk about it societal level, like exactly what we're doing right now, right? Just talking about it. Depression among males does exist. It does kill people, literally, right? And the more we can talk about it, the more ears it gets, the better it is for everyone. On a political or national level, so to speak, I think there needs to be more advocacy for males, right? So I think there's a lot of good work being done already. People talking about how we need to get more counselors and psychologists into the populace and all that kind of things. But I think the conversation needs to evolve a little bit to say who is the ones who needs access to this help. Traditionally, it's women who've been abused and all that kind of things, and also children, right? These are the two main populations. I think more has to be done for the males, right? To have people who look out for the guys and that such, right? So like females, for example, there's WAO.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it stands for. And our
Women's Aid Organization.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's no guys version of that, right? And I know literally people or guys who have been abused, who've been physically abused, emotionally abused, and they have nowhere to turn to, right? The only one they have to is to turn to cops. And even then also they're mortally afraid, because if I go to the cops and tell them my wife has been beating me up, what's the cop going to say?
Yeah.
Like, man up, right?
Yeah. Grow up here.
Exactly.
Back to the whole problem again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we need, on that kind of national level, I think we need to have more advocacy groups, right? People who advocate for male mental health, right? I think that's really, really important, right? So those are some things that we can try and initiate change. I think change is going to be like a freight train, right? It's going to be really, really slow, but once it picks up momentum, then it'll start carrying itself, hopefully.
This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been really, really good. And really good questions as well. Some really got me thinking as well.
Yeah. Dr. Joel, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Now, we know you're probably going through something. If you're watching this is step one for you to get help already. You may have depression, you may not, but it's good to actually get an answer, get a diagnosis. So here's some links for you to go check out. These are reputable organizations. And if you're checking us out on the podcast, we have the links in the description. Please do get in touch with us. We want to hear your stories. If you have some on depression, you may agree with us. You may not agree with us on what we just had a chat about. You want to hear your thoughts as well. Leave those in the comments. And I'll tell you what, subscribe. We have lots of different conversations going all the time. We want to hear from you as well. And we'll see you in the next conversation.